Thank you, everyone. I want to thank Silvia as well. She is an anthropologist, researcher, interpreter, and translator. She's been working with UIC SPH for almost 10 years, and we're pleased to have her as our Spanish interpreter. That being said, welcome to the Epidemics of Injustice. If you feel comfortable, please introduce yourself into the chat, saying your name, your pronouns, and share how you feel. Today, as your week is going with anything health equity related or health related in your community. Next slide, please. So just a reminder, we have the class site here that you can look up with this QR code. And on the class site, next slide. We have course information where you learn about those who plan the course, those who are involved behind the scenes, a little bit more on our syllabus and our objectives for the course for this year. We talk about what is possible, what is a world that we could build together, what is possible. Next slide. And also we encourage you to go to our site to see more of our history, about our theme. Also our full length acknowledgement, any content warning. You know, we do say that in this class we are touching on important topics around justice and people's lives, especially those that are marginalized, disenfranchised. So some of the topics are difficult. Please take care of yourself. If you need to step away, please do so. We also have language justice with our live interpretation, and just mindful of Zoom controls to stay on mute and raise your hand if you have questions, write in the chat, or if it's instructed, come off of mute. Next slide. So I have the great pleasure of introducing Arturo Carrillo. He is a licensed social worker and director of health and violence prevention at Brighton Park Neighborhood Community Council. He has also led collaborative or community wellness to research and document inequity and access to quality mental health services throughout local communities within the city, and advocates for the creation of a citywide non-police crisis response program grounded in public operating and expanding public operated mental health systems throughout the city through the Treatment Not Trauma campaign. So thank you, Dr. Arturo Carrillo, for being here. Also, along with his colleague, Elena Gormley, she was a social worker organizer and a notable threat to the integrity of social work profession. She has organized also with Treatment No Trauma since 2021. Outside of her regular work, she's active in different spaces such as this one. She's a co-chair of the Chicago Democratic Socialists of America and serves on the board of National Lawyers Guild of Chicago. So with that, I'll let Arturo and Elena get started. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Thank you. Do we have to put up the slides, or?
I can do it if you'd like.
Yes, that would be fabulous.
Sure, yeah. One second. Okay, just let me know with next slide. Thank you.
Yes, so we are talking about politicized organizing work, and we're specifically going to be discussing the Treatment Not Trauma campaign. Next slide. As we start out, we are talking about organizing to prevent trauma and to have better systems to address and treat trauma. And we can't have this conversation without also looking at our current moment in time. The photo on the left is the Palestinian checkpoint in Hebron in occupied Palestine. I wanted to be very mindful of some of the pictures we chose, but there is ongoing attacks in Rafah in southern Gaza. There is continued violence by extremist settler groups and Israeli troops in the West, what is known as the West Bank. And we've also been seeing a lot of organizing. That photo on the right was the rally after Chicago's municipal ceasefire resolution passed. So obviously, we're talking about all of these topics when we're also, when there are mass trauma and genocidal events happening as we're sharing this. And the organizing to end genocide is, of course, tightly connected to organizing around treatment, not trauma. And the clearest connection is that Rossana Rodriguez Sanchez, who has been driving treatment, not trauma, is also was also one of the lead sponsors for the ceasefire resolution. So, of course, we're talking about trauma. We cannot talk about this as an isolated topic. Next slide, please. So trauma is both a clinical diagnosis. You can look it up in the ICD-9, the International Compendium of Diseases. You can look it up in the Diagnostics and Statistics Manual to see what sort of the clinical definition is. Trauma is also something that we kind of talk about whenever people are experiencing general sort of stress, anger, sadness, stressors, and trauma can happen on the personal level. Trauma can happen within a family or a group, and trauma can also be experienced at the community level. All of these sort of discussions of trauma, none is sort of like a better definition. None is a sort of more serious or less serious. Trauma impacts communities in a whole variety of ways. So of course, and we're talking about kind of an organizing to create a better system for addressing trauma in Chicago. And of course, we have to have an international perspective as well. Next slide. Treatment Not Trauma is really focused on addressing the neoliberal destruction of public mental health care clinics in Chicago. Chicago is one of the cities that does have a socialized system of mental health care. And what we have seen is that since the 1980s, that system has been constantly attacked by elected officials. This started with the Daley administration. The most dramatic closures occurred under the Emanuel administration. We saw Mayor Lightfoot promise to reopen and then immediately backtrack. And so what this means is that if you are not doing well, and whether that is, I just want to talk to a therapist, or if you're in a more serious sort of crisis situation, your ability to obtain care in the city of Chicago depends on where you live. As we know, there is a lot of healthcare apartheid in the city of Chicago. And what kind of insurance you have. One of the things that Arturo is going to be kind of breaking down with data is that in Chicago, access is a far bigger barrier than a stigma. And of course, looking at an international perspective, Israeli troops have been killing a lot of mental health workers in Gaza. Again, we have so many people, millions of people experiencing a mass trauma event, and the people who are trained to assist with that are getting literally killed by the military. Israel has very much an austerity mindset to mental health care as well. I was seeing in a different sort of therapist group, someone saying that someone was volunteering in Israel as a social worker, and her caseload was 80 hotels, not 80 people, but 80 hotels of displaced people. So this kind of austerity approach to mental health does not serve anyone at all. Next slide. I'll turn it over to Arturo for this part.
So thank you, Elena. This is absolutely the setting and introduction that we need to have when we're talking about this issue. we'll talk about this a little bit further along in the presentation as to what Elena means when she says apartheid, right? This idea that our system creates two realities in the same city, right? The tale of two cities, as is often said, right? Where certain people have access to high quality care and other people are dealt to deal with it on their own or figure out a way to maybe find resources if any exist. And so I approach this conversation as a professional service delivery a person who was working out of the Southwest side in the Little Village community offering free mental health services, right? So I was working as part of a hospital that was offering free services through its charity arm and a community wellness program, and seeing firsthand the impacts, right, on what was happening when the city was closing public mental health centers, right? How our wait list would increase every time there was both cuts in the city with the closure of the centers, but also cuts in the state funding that would support community mental health providers to offer free services or reimburse for services that were unbillable. So for me as a provider, as a mental health social worker, clinical social worker, I was able to be in the community offering free, high quality mental health services and dealing with an endless wait list, right? So, part of that becomes as we are in the social work field, thinking about how we can address immediate needs and address the situations that people are dealing with the most urgency and the most care that we could provide. And sometimes as social workers, we're also tasked with the responsibility of also taking a step back and taking a bigger picture view on the issue, not just understanding the needs of that one individual or that family, but of a community as a whole, as a city as a whole, right? And so today we'll be talking about the work that has become the Collaborative for Community Wellness and the Treatment Not Trauma campaign. But I do want to start by acknowledging that our efforts built on other efforts, right? And that starts with, again, the reaction to the closure of the public mental health centers that Elena mentioned just now. We were reacting, all of us as providers and policymakers and people who are involved in the policy space, trying to find out how we can best address the impacts for those who were left out of services when those centers closed. So I want to acknowledge the efforts of the Coalition to Save our Mental Health Centers. The Coalition to Save Our Mental Health Centers have, after the initial round of closures under the Daley administration and under the Rahm Emanuel administration, decided to take a policy initiative through the state to pass a new state law that would allow local residents to create taxing districts. And those taxing districts can then generate additional revenue to fund mental health centers in those taxing districts. You may have heard there's a few that have popped up since those efforts started over a decade ago. There's centers now on the west side, on the south side now. There's one that just recently passed. There's some on the north side, right? So those centers, and the attempt to create the legislative tools to have people fund and sustain mental health centers was a direct reaction of the closure of the public mental health centers. The other approach was the approach that the mental health movement took, and that was many public mental health centers, recipients of services from those public mental health centers who organized, who started taking to direct action and direct resistance to the closures of the centers of the closures of the centers. We have plenty of pictures and film and that capture the history of that mental health movement. Many advocates who put their bodies on the line when the Woodlawn Center was closed and were arrested for resisting the closure of that center by shackling themselves to each other inside the public mental health center itself. And advocates who were there were pointing out that people would lose their lives if those centers closed. And in fact, many people did lose their lives. So the mental health movement, Stop, an organization on the South Side, and many others were very much engaged in direct action resistance and were leading that charge when Rahm Emanuel closed those public mental health centers, and also when Daley was proposing to close those centers as well, right? So we were building on efforts of these coalitions that were reacting to the closure of centers, but we were also building and bringing together community organizations that were very much trying to answer the question of what does mental health access look like in my local community? How can I engage with residents around housing and food access issues and community needs without acknowledging also that mental health and mental health concerns are very much part of the problem that we need to address as well. So the Collaborative for Community Wellness was very intentional in our efforts to build community-based, community-led research initiatives that can quantify and be able to speak to what the problems were that people were facing in a way that we can take as a tool for policy reform and advocacy. So next slide, please. Through our efforts, the Collaborative for Community Wellness started organizing throughout the Southwest side to bring together various stakeholders, community leaders, advocacy groups, people who are in this room today, actually, to be part of a research initiative that was based on community participatory action. And that research allowed us to take a step back collectively and assess what the real mental health needs were of the residents on the Southwest side and what were the real barriers, right? We didn't want to fall into this trap that stigma and assume like professionals and in the professional space and in my classroom, for example, we were being taught that right, people of color do not access mental health services because of stigma. We didn't want to fall into that trap. We wanted to actually talk to the people ourselves. So we collectively engaged in this project, next slide, that was able to quantify what it was that people were saying, were experiencing, and were living through when it came to access issues for mental health services. And this is the cover of the report that we were able to collectively create together. So next slide. In that report, we were able to survey nearly 3,000 community residents, right? Those community residents, each of them shared with us through a data collection method that we were using, in this case, a very short survey that we were able to administer in a public setting. We were able to take those relationships that these community organizations had developed throughout the years with people in the community that they knew firsthand were dealing with access issues to mental health services, and able to equip them with a research tool, in this case, a survey that could be administered in a very confidential and accessible manner. We called this an emotional wellness evaluation. We didn't call it a mental health survey. We wanted to be respectful of people's possible resistance to talk about mental health in the public setting. So we talked about emotional wellness, and it was worded in a way that made it very much accessible for anybody who would be able to take a few minutes to talk to us. So this was based on the work of organizers, community health workers, leaders in each one of these organizations and the community who were very much interested in understanding what access issues look like. So as you could tell, the Southwest side was very much one part
so like keep my routine.
I'm sorry. So Southwest side tells a part of the story, but again, that's where this story begins for the coalition. I want to just quickly share the data that we were able to gather from that survey. We've actually done this survey since, where we've been able to replicate the same study citywide. But I want to highlight this first attempt that we had at understanding what mental health access barriers were, because it was very much formative to the early years of our efforts, and also has been replicated every time we've done this survey since, right? So the same findings that you're going to see here are very similar year after year when we've done this survey in other parts of the city and done a citywide analysis as well. So on the next slide, what we're going to see is what people were self-reporting, right? We were trying to understand what were issues that people were dealing with the greatest frequency and intensity. Half of the respondents were saying that they were dealing and experiencing depressive episodes, anxiety, acculturation, stress, the need for parenting support, trauma. These were the top-rated mental health concerns that people were presenting in the survey. What was interesting about the survey is we were able to, again, have people select those situations that represent what their experience was in a very anonymous way. We didn't ask any identifying information, but we did ask people to check boxes, right? So people who are high-functioning adults that you encounter on the streets, right? Like they won't necessarily come out and tell you about every personal experience of trauma, But in this survey, right, they were able to check boxes and say, okay, this is things I'm dealing with. This is a real thing for me. And it was really telling for the community health workers and the leaders who were collecting this data, and for all of us as we were analyzing this data. It gave us a better picture of what the actual mental health needs were when, again, we asked nearly 3,000 people. The next question on the next slide you'll see is, what were people's responses when we asked the question of, would you consider seeking emotional support, i.e. counseling services, by a professional? So when we were asked to assess what the mental health needs were in the previous slide, we saw that people were very much self-identifying as dealing with emotional issues that were rated of highest frequency and intensity, right? So something that's very serious in their lives. Again, the next question then becomes, well, would you seek out professional services? We didn't want to make the assumption here that people won't seek out services. Again, that stigma may be the barrier, that people are resistant to professional services. We asked them very clearly, would you seek out professional services? And the grand majority of respondents here said yes or probably yes, right? So there was very much a favorable percentage of people, 80% of the people who said, yes, I would seek out professional services, right? We don't want to assume that not going to services means that there's a resistance to receiving services. We don't want to make the mistake that people don't see a doctor because they don't want to see a doctor. We want to ask people, would you see a doctor, even if one is not available for you to see, right? So it's a very much a health justice issue that we base this question on. I do want to quickly say that when we've done this same question through a citywide survey, that percentage was 94% of respondents. 94% of Chicagoans in a similar study done during the pandemic were absolutely interested in seeking mental health services, right? So again, I always say that by trying to challenge us to think of another question that we could ask all of Chicagoans in which 94% of them would agree on, right? So then the obvious question, if there's 80% of people in this survey who were asking or would be interested in accessing services, then what's the barrier? So on the next slide, what you'll see was what people rated as the biggest barriers to care. This is where we asked people to select all the things, all that apply, that are keeping you from accessing services. Now, this is all that applies, so people could literally check every one of these boxes. What you're seeing here is a representation of how many people selected each one of those boxes. And we didn't intend to design it this way, but when we did the analysis, right, it was so clear to me to see how the structural barriers, right, the way the system creates access to mental health services is what by far is keeping people from accessing those services, not stigma. As you can see, only 11% of the people check the box for stigma. And we didn't use the phrase stigma just in case you're thinking that, right? We didn't say stigma as one of the options. We said people would think I'm crazy. La gente pensaría que estaría loco, loca, to access services, right? So only 11% of the people selected that, right? We were very, very intentional to find another variable that would correlate with that as well, and to test to see if there was internal validity here. And we saw that only 10% of people selected the other option of, I don't think those services would help me in any way. It would do me no good to talk to a professional, right? And finally, only 9% of people selected a family disapproval, which for us was a way of measuring, if the majority of the respondents in this case that filled out the survey were women, would their spouse, their significant other, would somebody in their family disapprove of them accessing services? Is there some kind of stigma within the family that would keep you from accessing services? And again, only that 9%, right? So this is data from 2016 and 2017, right? So we're talking, 5-6 years ago, right? That data for us, actually more, right? This data is for us something that was very important. It was a powerful tool to challenge this dominant narrative, right? This narrative that says people of color, Latinos, don't access services because of stigma. And I'll ask you to please respond in the chat. Like, why is it then, if what we're seeing in the data, that cost is the biggest prohibitive barrier by far, lack of health insurance, those services not existing in your area, not knowing where to go because they're not offered in your neighborhood. Why is it that then there's such a deliberate narrative of stigma being the biggest barrier, right? Our data does not show that in any way. Again, this is from 2017. We've repeated this survey. So I'll ask you, and please respond in the chat, why is it then that stigma tends to be put as the biggest barrier to care? So again, the way the data kind of broke down, the issue was, again, structural barriers were the highest rated barriers. Programmatic barriers, again, the things that limit access, that a program can actually do more to provide. For example, childcare, something that we did at that program where I was working at when we did this study, we offered childcare. We saw childcare, not knowing where to leave your child during groups that were being offered, right? This whole thing here was something that we saw as a programmatic barrier. We provided transportation assistance, bus passes. At some point, we even had funding to provide Uber rides for people to come to their appointments, extended evening hours, offered, of course, services in Spanish, right? All of this was things that programs could do more. And again, recommendations that we provided to providers to enable access. But again, social barriers were the lowest rated barriers. And I'm seeing some of the responses in the chat. Absolutely, right? There's this bias in this kind of blame the victim narrative, right? People who have the least amount of access to care are not going to care because it's their own fault, right? It's a very convenient narrative. And something that, again, even if you are very much trying to address the structural barriers, like where do you start? How do you do this? And it's very overwhelming. So it's a lot easier to talk about stigma and maybe develop literature or pamphlets that can address stigma and have that be the focus of your efforts. But again, are we really doing justice by talking about stigma when in reality it's an access issue? So we use the same data not only to make it a publication. We again, none of this was funded. None of this was meant to be published for academic journals. It was meant to be a policy tool. So what we then did with this data is that we went back to the community. We presented that data back to the community. We said, here's what we found. We mapped it out for folks. We were able to take that, 30,000 foot view and take that snapshot and bring it back to the community and say, here's what it looks like on the Southwest side. On the next slide, you'll see we were very clear. We were asking people then what would be needed to make the changes and what do you recommend for us to continue to advocate for as we're trying to create solutions as much as we are able to identify what the problem is. So people told us that they wanted to redefine mental health, right? Mental health for them wasn't just about going to a hospital or wasn't necessarily going to see a therapist as the only route, right? They wanted to see a therapist, as you saw in the data, but therapy in and of itself can be limiting as well. So they wanted to think about how community-led initiatives can help develop spaces where people can access wellness, mental health supports, and family supports as well. They wanted to address these structural barriers, right? The public mental health centers were closed, one of them on the Southwest side in back of the yards, and that was very much felt by residents of the community. And this idea that services should be long-term, they should be trauma-focused, as I mentioned earlier, they should be holistic. Next slide. These recommendations really went a long way to shaping the report. I'll jump to the next slide because it also helped us create a final product that we could take back to City Hall and that we could actually use for policy change, right? This picture that you see on the slide was our member check. We were able to then take our final report after we heard the recommendation, created a full package report that you can find on our website, collaborativeforcommunityoneess.org. And that report then was a living document. But before we went public with that report, we took it back to the community. That's the member check that we had right before we released this report in 2017. And that member check was our final attempt to collect the last round of input before we made this and disseminated both the findings and the recommendations to make sure they aligned with community. Every step of the way from start to finish, this was meant to be a community-led initiative. And so on the next slide, you see what the demands were. And those demands started with reopening the public mental health centers, right? They wanted us to advocate for expanding more centers, and those centers should be free and accessible to the community. And the government should be fully funding these centers, right? This should not be necessarily relying on philanthropy, as most nonprofits currently are. They should also provide culturally appropriate services. They should fund systems of care that invest in the support structures that are sustainable, that are long-term, right? Those public mental health centers meant something to the community because they were there for generations, right? They were a resource that you could walk to, just like your library, just like your public school, just like your park, right? These were parts of the fabric of the community, the infrastructure, and it wasn't able to be replaced by nonprofits who rely on grants and whose mission evolves and changes depending on the ebb and flows of funding. And so the recommendations were absolutely clear and pushed us, right, to start advocating for structural reform, right? So what do I mean by structural reform? I'm going to quickly unpack that in the next slide. This is a very dense slide. One more slide. This is a very dense slide. So I encourage you to take a picture of it and just kind of read it slowly. We won't have the time necessarily to unpack it in this lecture, but this is pulled from a very, very, very good book that I'd highly recommend to anyone who's interested, called Neoliberal Chicago. And the authors, Larry Bennett and others, really unpack what neoliberal policies look like in the urban setting, specifically in Chicago, right? So this breakdown here, and I'll start with the first point here, talks about an ideology, a dominant ideology, one that neoliberal Democrats like Rahm Emanuel very much espouse and believe in. This idea that government should not be providing social services, right? In fact, they believe very clearly that they need to privatize as much of the public sector as possible. And you saw that as evidenced by the closure of 7 of the 12 public mental health centers under Daley, and 7 of the 19 under Daley, leaving 12, and then again 7 of the 12 under Rahm Emanuel, leaving 5. Right, so you start seeing the erosion, the disinvestment. This is what the disinvestment looks like, and you see then the push towards privatization. And in many cases, privatization means selling off public goods to for-profit or investment groups or for-profit businesses. Think about the Skyway. Think about the parking meter deal that sold the parking meters as an asset, as a cash cow for the city. They sold it for pennies on the dollar to investors, right? The Skyway itself, right? This is physical infrastructure that the city used as revenue and is selling it off to investors, again, for a fraction of what it's worth. But also think about privatization as the closure of public mental health centers and shifting that responsibility to nonprofit organizations, sometimes federally qualified health centers, sometimes nonprofit community-based organizations, sometimes small church groups that receive nonprofit support for charitable contributions to the community by creating programs for residents, right? Like all of this is also privatization. Think about privatization also as what Rahm Emanuel did when he closed 52 public schools. And those public schools then become consolidated schools, public schools that go back to overcrowded classrooms that, again, when finally the class size was small enough in Black neighborhoods to have a good student-to-teacher ratio, you have neoliberal Democrats like Rahm Emanuel calling them underutilized, closing them, and then consolidating schools, leading to violence, leading to harm, leading to, again, the lack of investment in communities. And the shifting of public dollars towards nonprofit educational schools, in this case, charter schools, nonprofit schools that are dedicated to privatize public functions, in this case, education, this is all privatization. This is absolutely the neoliberal agenda. You could go through each one of these slides, and you'll be each one of these points on this slide, and you'll think of examples of how it looks like here in Chicago and how it's played out. Again, we won't have time to unpack this, but I do want to highlight one more. Of course, the increase of policing and surveillance, right? The idea that the system itself, the government should not be providing any social services except for policing. Policing should be the main function of government, aside from also investments and developing opportunities for developers to come in and gentrify neighborhoods or invest in neighborhoods, right? This idea that policing, and it becomes the main function of government, something that we'll talk about in today's lecture as well. On the next slide, again, I teach an entire course on the impacts of neoliberalism in Chicago. It's a course on structural social work and structural violence that I teach for an entire semester. So I could absolutely unpack this for hours. I won't today, but I just want to quickly expose you to what structural social work and what theorists in structural social work talk about when we talk about structural reforms, right? On the left, you see this bridge, right? They talk about the bridge as a platform, right? We all exist on this platform. The social relational space where we interact with one another on this platform is defined by a dominant culture, a dominant narrative that reinforces classism, patriarchy, ableism, sexism, right? We could go on and on. You'll see them listed here. But they're also rooted and upheld by the social systems that reinforce this social relations based on models of capitalism, racism, right? That reinforce and are built into our institutions, right? So that, of course, is represented in the economic system, the political system, the education system, the welfare system. Each one of these systems uphold our lived reality on this platform. But what theorists in this work will challenge us to do is to not just stop there in our analysis, right? The systems themselves can be harmful and create harmful situations, but they're also rooted in ideologies, right? So they'll challenge us to think about, again, this bridge model as something that the pillars themselves are very observable, right? You drive by a bridge, you see the pillars holding up that platform. What you don't see, what is kind of out of sight, out of mind, is what's underneath the ground. Those pillars are standing on a foundation. That foundation, in this case, through this ideology, through this conceptual framework that we're seeing here, is rooted in ideologies. And those ideologies define then and reinforce each one of the layers above, right? And the ideologies in the liberal paradigm are reinforcing these ideas of individualism, right? An ideology based on capitalism, inequality, representative democracy, this idea that we elect representatives who make the important decisions for us, right? This is the foundation on which all of this is built, right? So for us in social justice work, I could take the model that many organizers, all organizers know, right? You live in the world as it is, and you operate and work towards the world as you'd like it to be, right? So what it's asking us to think about is, what does transformation look like as we work towards, right, a different reality, a different system that's created with a different ideology. And so what you see here, and the authors are not shy to talk about the importance of grounding ourselves in in a socialist paradigm that challenges and changes the entire ideology on which systems are built to reinforce a different reality that can create a different social relational space for all of us. And the next slide, again, I won't have time to unpack this one necessarily as much, but when we assess and think about mental health as an issue that we organize around, the conceptual framework that you see here is one that for us, we try to understand, again, the intersection of the social relational space. How does mental health access play out for communities in which we're working? And you see that in the top layer. What are the experiences that people are dealing with? What are the social systems that reinforce those experiences? And under all that, what's the ideology? How does that create systems of oppression? And how can we, through organizing efforts, create resistance, right? And so in this conceptual model you see here, the collaborative for community wellness is very much present between the systems that uphold this inequality, and the social relational space, the people that we organize with, who are part of the change process with us, right? As we take on the political system, as we take on various systems that are harmful. And it's not easy work, but it absolutely has made a difference. It has made a change in the city already since this campaign initiated. And we'll be unpacking some of that today. So I just want to kind of quickly race through a few more slides to talk again about how situating us in Chicago and how we are dealing with this lived reality. On the next slide, what you're going to see is two maps of Chicago side by side. On the map on the right, you're going to see Chicago's highest economic hardship community areas. This is a designation that the Chicago Department of Public Health created when talking about what are the marginalized, most economically impacted communities, which combines multiple data points that are combining here to talk about the areas that are the highest and medium level economic hardship neighborhoods in the city. On the left, based on our research, we went out and mapped where every one of the mental health providers operate in the city of Chicago. And as you can see, the ratios are astounding, right? We're talking about how many mental health providers per 1,000 community residents. Most neighborhoods that you see that, again, correlate here with the medium and high economic hardship community areas have less than 0.2 therapists, in some cases 0 therapists per 1,000 community residents. This is data from 2018. Whereas the more affluent neighborhoods have ratios ranging anywhere from 3 to 140 therapists per 1,000 community residents, right? So we're seeing saturation of care in some neighborhoods and the absolute apartheid system that we're talking about in low-income communities and middle-income communities as well. So again, next slide. I want to just also present a different way of seeing the same picture. Those neighborhoods that we're seeing in the pale yellow are the neighborhoods that we just mentioned that have less than 0.2 therapists on average per 1,000 residents. And contrasting that with the higher, more affluent neighborhoods that have an average of 4.3 therapists, you're also seeing an overlay of where the public mental health centers were closed under Rahm Emanuel. Every one of those X's is one of the public mental health centers that was there providing resources to people who are in areas of the city that need them the most, and where Rahm Emanuel decided to save something like $3-4 million by closing 7 of the 12 centers. On the next slide, what we're going to see is how our spending as a city has gone over the last 50 years, over 50 years here, more than half a century of spending, how that's increased year after year per capita adjusted for inflation spending with the police department has more than doubled since 1964, right? So again, thinking about what neoliberalism looks like, what this investment looks like, this is what it looks like, right? This is where we're seeing where our priorities are as a city, as representative, and this representative democracy that we have, what those people that are representing us decide is important for us. On the next slide, we're going to see is the impact, right? What does it look like then when we cut funding for mental health services and increase funding for policing? Again, policing becomes the main service provided for residents of the city, making, of course, violence, harm, and perpetual exclusion of care from people who need it the most, right? On the top, you're seeing the picture, a headline from a publication that talks about the largest mental health hospital is Cook County Jail, right? Let's just think about that for a second, right? This is what the harm looks like. These are the people who need care the most, and in some cases are committing crimes to be able to access care, right? And this is not us saying this. This is what Sheriff Tom Dart will say, and you can go on his website, and he's made public many examples of people who are in there at a very expensive cost to to incarcerate individuals who were stealing loaves of bread to feed themselves, who were having a mental health crisis and ended up in a jail because they were assaulted and defended themselves, and now they're assaulting police officers, right? It's a charge, right? So this is one experience. The other experience that we know is very real is the experience of Quintonio Legrier, who called for mental health support himself, calling 911 before police showed up, and ended up shooting him and a neighbor, right? We have countless examples of this, and for us, right, this is an experience that is very much reinforced and created by these structures that invest in policing and disinvest in care. So I'll pass it back to Elena to talk about, again, how in this political reality we've organized, we've resisted, and we've been able to speak truth to power, especially when that power structure is trying to enforce a narrative of equity and justice when in fact they're doing the opposite.
So yes, if we can advance the next slide, please. So we're going to talk a little bit about looking at the Lightfoot administration to our present day. Recap, in 2019, Rahm Emanuel did not run for re-election, and Lori Lightfoot was elected as mayor, and her whole message was bringing in the light, ending the old cronyist ways of Chicago. And one of the things that she ran on was a promise to reopen the closed mental health clinics. Well, guess what happened? Next slide. She almost immediately backtracked on that, and her nominee for Chicago Department of Public Health Commissioner, Dr. Allison Arwady, was a very public opponent to reopening the mental health centers. There was some early electoral organizing by members of city council that blocked her nomination until they got a community hearing on the impact of closing public mental health centers. But she was finally approved as the CDPH commissioner, and her whole attitude and kind of the attitude of some of the senior managers she brought into CDPH, the Chicago Department of Public Health, was saying, well, we don't actually need to reopen the centers. We have all of these great nonprofits that can meet people's needs, and they're going to be more culturally appropriate, and they're going to be more accessible. And so one of the big things that Dr. Arwady really promoted, which was something called the trauma-informed centers of care. And the idea being that instead of supporting the public centers, CDPH was going to support with programming support and with money this network of nonprofits. Next slide. As it turns out, the Collaborative for Community Wellness did a mystery shopper study, actually having people call into the trauma-informed centers of care and try to get appointments by saying that they didn't have insurance or they were insured through Medicaid. As it turned out, there were just really major issues with being able to actually reach agencies and to actually get appointments. So as it turns out, that private neoliberal model is not actually a replacement for public mental health centers. Next slide. And of course, many of these nonprofits have wait lists. Some agencies, even like before the pandemic, had about a 6 to 9 month wait list for their services. And what the collaborative found by doing this research is that there were still a lot of wait lists and wait list of at least 3 months. And like consider if you're not doing okay now and having to wait 3 months, conditions can decline. While one of the things that the CDPH administration said was that the trauma-informed centers of care would provide care to anyone regardless of their ability to pay, only 19 of these agencies actually offered care free of charge. So again, basically, the leadership of the Chicago Department of Public Health sold a really big lie to the city. Next slide. And so what that was the organizing environment that that treatment not trauma really grew out of. There was basically this really a lot of anger and disappointment at this reneging of a major campaign promise. And then you have the pandemic, and so you had this major mass trauma event, and then you had the uprisings in 2020, where there was just a very broad understanding that we needed to have better structures of care, and those structures of care cannot involve police. Next slide. So treatment not trauma was introduced as a council order in the fall of 2020 by 33rd Ward Alderwoman Rosana Rodriguez Sanchez. And what that council order basically said was it was going to order CDPH to reopen public mental health centers, and through the public mental health centers operate a public citywide non-police crisis response program. The idea being we recognize that there's major mental health needs, and we recognize that police cannot be the people responding to them. It was pretty immediately blocked by Mayor Lightfoot. Rosanna will talk about how once she introduced it, a lot of her colleagues in city council stopped talking to her. And what came out of the fall 2020 budget is $1 million for a public non-police crisis response pilot, and then more money allocated to a police co-responder pilot, where essentially a social worker and an armed police officer authorized to beat you up and kill you are going to go to calls paired up together. There was massive amounts of opposition within the collaborative for the co-responder model. The city tried to massage the language when they tried to talk about it to hide the fact that they were supporting a police co-responder model. And so what we did a lot of organizing to really organize opposition to this and make this a wedge issue. We did like a public testimony campaign of social workers saying, actually, no, we don't want to work next to cops. Are you kidding me? And then we also really used the policy as an organizing tool. We didn't just, again, like the collaborative's whole focus on policies, that it's community-led, and that the policy is then used to organize policy demands. And so in 2022, in 3 wards, the 6th Ward and the 20th Ward, both on the south side, and the 33rd Ward on the northwest side, collected signatures for a non-binding ballot referendum question. And the reason why we wanted to do that is that we had a lot of data and research, but we were sick and tired of hearing from the mayor and from the health commissioner, well, the public doesn't actually want this. We could put out all of these different research reports really indicating the public does want us, and we were just getting ignored and ignored. And we recognize that having some kind of electoral win that showed how many voters wanted this thing in the neighborhoods that had some of the highest volumes of crisis calls was going to make this a wedge issue for the municipal elections. Every single one of those ballot referenda passed by enormous margins. It's like 92 to 96% voting yes. Candidates do not typically get 92 to 96% of people voting yes unless you run completely unopposed. So we were able to show that actually, as it turns out, voters really want this. And then that was really used to propel demands during the 2023 municipal election. And by the time candidates started announcing, both for alder people and for mayor, this was essentially a wedge issue. It was on questionnaires. Many endorsing groups, unions, community groups, organizing groups, the groups that can kind of have organized people and money behind your campaign, really made treatment not trauma an endorsement requirement. And we really saw that pretty much if a candidate for mayor was serious about making the runoff, they had to say that they supported treatment not trauma. One of the wildest moments was Paul Vallis at the People's Policy Forum at New Mount Hope Church in Garfield Park, basically reading the room before saying that, yes, he supported treatment, not trauma, because he understood that if he said no, his campaign was going to be completely over. And so as it turns out, that was successful. Brandon Johnson beat the most pro-police mayoral candidate in recent memory, and beat a lot of really gross defund arguments by being an advocate for treatment, not trauma. So then, like, we had this really major electoral win. We now knew that we were going to actually get the votes to what we wanted to pass. We were going to get a mayor that supported us. So what does it mean to organize when you're organizing against friends? Next slide.
We can come back to that slide, but I just wanted to quickly highlight a few things that Elena just mentioned, but I don't want to interrupt your flow and I keep going. I'll come back to this.
Okay, yeah. So we'll revisit. So let's go to the next slide. Next slide. Essentially, we had this really, really big win. Lori loses her job. Brandon is elected. Treatment not trauma opponents lose their jobs. And so what does it mean to organize when we knew we were going to be making a lot of demands? And you still have to organize. The whole point of sort of electoral work is I don't think electoral work is about picking your friends. It is picking the friendliest adversary that you want to have in your organizing environment. And so we had to kind of consider that because we still had a very anti-TNT health commissioner. So we also really had to make some demands, and you'll see some of the demands in the next slide. So one of the first things we did after Mayor Brandon's inauguration is that we created a digital campaign called Fire Artwitty. The main reason being is that near the very end of the election, one of the final debates, both Paul Vallis and Brandon Johnson were asked, would you retain Dr. Allison Artwitty, who, alongside being really opposed to mental health support, also was just absolutely awful to the teachers, really was demanding that teachers go back and students go back in very unsafe learning environments when COVID was still spreading very rapidly. Her model for deploying COVID-19 vaccines was really ineffective and inequitable. And she was also testifying against legislation that would end union busting by nonprofits that receive public funds. And so we really knew that she really needed to be out if we wanted to see a change in CDPH's approach to mental health. And we also knew that she's a really effective communicator. The reason why she was really popularly liked is that she was really good at doing her weekly live streams on Facebook. And so we needed to do basically very aggressive social media counter messaging. And so we created the hashtag. We created an email campaign to send emails to Mayor Johnson and to First Deputy Chief of Staff, Cristina Passione Zayas, really highlighting her really bad record on mental health, her bad record on mistreating the teachers, her constant support of money over people, her support of really disastrous environmental policies, her involvement with the Hilco disaster in Little Village, her support of General Iron operating on the Southeast side, her support of partnering with police for crisis response. And so we created that email campaign, and then we created like a social media toolkit with a bunch of graphics, and we did specific social media power hours to get as many people sharing and reposting and getting the message out and getting people to respond. And so we got a couple of thousand people within about a month to put out this demand and email the mayor. And it worked. He fired her. And there was a lot of like, she really like, tried to really make this out as the teachers were out to get me. Brandon, doesn't like me because he's CTU. And I want to use this space right now on the record to say, The Chicago Teachers Union is phenomenal. CTU is a member of the Collaborative for Community Wellness. They have been really great at amplifying our demands. CTU was not involved in the creation of the Fire Arwady campaign. It was, I think, 10 different volunteers. Again, want to emphasize volunteers. I was doing this in my off hours. 3 different Google documents to draft our messaging, and my paid Canva account. So just really want to highlight, no, the teachers were not behind Dr. Arwady's firing. A bunch of unpaid social workers and volunteers with CCW were behind Dr. Arwady's firing. If she's mad about it, she can come talk to me. But it was effective. And so this happened kind of in the summer, and it really set the stage for us to really then make more demands during the fall 2023 budget. Next slide.
Sorry to interrupt the flow. Can we take a quick 3-minute break? Bio break?
Yes,
Thank you.
absolutely. 3-minute break. Let's give thank you, Sylvia, our interpreter. And I think this is actually a good spot to then talk about the municipal wins. So 3-minute break. We'll see you in 3 minutes.
Thanks, everyone. Let's start to bring it back. And for the presenters, if you could slow the pace just a tiny bit to give our interpreter a little bit of room. Thanks so much. I'll share my screen again.
Not a tiny bit, a lot, much more, please.
All right, fantastic. Can we go to the next slide, please? So what we won in the 2023-2024 budget, we got a new health commissioner. Arturo was actually part of the committee that helped select the finalists, which was very exciting. We won in the city budget reopening of 2 clinics, and that includes space for those clinics, that includes staff, including nurses, psychiatrists, social workers, counselors, and overall a major expansion of staff positions within all of the public centers. And then we won an ordinance that is creating a dedicated treatment not trauma working group that is currently convening to basically develop and make recommendations to the city on exactly how the city can go about winning the rest of treatment not trauma. So again, some very, very exciting wins. And just to highlight, a long time to get to those wins. That is why there was constant organizing, developing a broader coalition, all of that research work, all of the digital advocacy, all of the rallies and marches. That's where we are from winning those things. Next slide, please. And so to consider what comes next. So what is happening right now is that there are citywide listening sessions with the Chicago Department of Public Health. They're all over the city. There was one today. There's going to be one Saturday at 10:30 at the Edgewater Library up on the north side. And those are opportunities for people to come in and really kind of share their input on what they want to see. And Treatment Not Trauma has been identifying people to attend those sessions, really make sure that Treatment Not Trauma demands are in all of those spaces. But again, this did not happen under the Daley administration. It did not happen under Rahm. It didn't happen under Lightfoot. We now actually have a city agency that understands that they work for the people. And that's, again, looking at that structural model and looking at a pivot from a government agency from a neoliberal model to a more sort of structural community-based model. We are continuing to do some more research, and we are continuing to organize to again make sure that we win more clinic reopenings, make sure that we have friendly folks in some of these big meetings, because I do want to highlight the end goal is not we reopen every single clinic closed under the manual administration or the daily administration. Our goal is to have a public mental health center in every single one of Chicago's 77 community areas. Our goal is having people who are not cops, but who are social workers, who are nurses, who are paramedics, being the public first responder when people are in crisis. And so we do have our very last slide, I think, has both myself and Arturo's contact information, but I think this is going to be kind of the best point to highlight kind of our big question. So what does a just mental health system look like to you? So go ahead and you can kind of put in the chat what would support be helpful through the public mental health centers for people who are experiencing a mental health emergency. And I want us to imagine winning. So imagine that we expand the programs we want. How can these centers work together with the non-police crisis response? And also, if you have other ideas about what a just mental health system would look like, you can also share those in the chat, but I figure that's a good time for people to kind of think about that, put that in the chat, and I think to play some of those videos from other cities' models about how they are doing this. So if you kind of want to go backtrack the slides to those videos, that's probably a good time to do it.
Yeah, just because, I think, as Elena's mentioning, right, it is a political fight, but it's also a fight that is about justice. It is about preventing harm, and creating opportunities for people to receive the care that they need by also developing a public workforce, right? These are all going to be city employees. We see the 40% of the city budget, nearly $3 billion that's currently going to policing, can instead create these alternative response teams like we've seen done in other cities. We won't have the time, but if anyone's interested, the slide that we had earlier shows an image of a program that we learned about that is operating in Eugene, Oregon. And that program has a paramedic responding with a behavioral health worker to people who are dealing with crises, right? It's also about removing police from these teams as well. I do want to quickly show a quick video as people are generating their thoughts, because crisis response with police still presents the same dangers of having police respond, right? We have seen and we've know that crisis intervention training for police officers doesn't necessarily reduce the harm that police officers do. Actually, data from research shows that it doesn't make much of an impact at all. Anecdotally, we know that Derek Chauvin, the police officer that murdered George Floyd, was a CIT trained officer, right? Police officers are trained to respond to crisis, not by necessarily providing social services or care, in spite of the amount of federal relief dollars that Lori Lightfoot set aside for the police department, something like over $200 million to support police overtime for community care. What they are there to do is to make sure people comply. I want to quickly show, if it's fine with everybody, I'm going to show a share screen to show a video of a crisis response team in New York City. So New York City was experimenting with having police respond. I do want to offer a trigger warning. This is going to have police violence as a video, in the video, but I do want to show, again, this is not a theoretical campaign. We're not saying police shouldn't because possibly. We're saying having police respond to crisis creates harm, and we've seen it happen in other cities. So New York City, as I mentioned, created a crisis response team that involved police officers to respond to crisis along with paramedics. And in this video, you're going to see an example of a situation where people were responding to crisis, when these co-response teams were responding to a mental health crisis of a young man.
We don't hear audio, Arturo.
Sorry, is there sound?
No sound right now. No,
No sound.
I can try on my end.
You know what? It's downloaded on my computer. That's why. Let me try. be sharing screen and then hitting that magical audio share sound. There it is. Okay.
Police be the ones to respond to 911 calls about mental health emergencies. A new pilot program is about to send EMTs out with social workers instead of officers as they answer the call for change. Now, there's a range of reaction from optimism to safety concerns with this. Let's go to the I-Team's Melissa Russo with the exclusive.
No, y'all can't break my door. Y'all not gonna pay for it. You're not breaking my door.
Peggy Herrera called 911 because her son needed help.
He was having a crisis and he locked himself in the house.
Peggy was afraid of what might happen if police showed up.
I need the ambulance to show up first, not the police.
EMTs arrived with police who could see her son through the window.
He's fine. He's there. You can see him. He's not bloody. He's not nothing.
But the situation went south.
No! Stop! Stop! They grabbed him by the neck, pulled him down, beat him up. He never got the help he needed, and I spent the night in jail.
Encounters like these are why many are calling for police to be removed from responding when someone calls 911 about a mental health issue.
So again, this is why we've campaigned for treatment of trauma as hard as we have. We have demanded that police are removed from the care units. The previous administration created a crisis response system that was centered on policing. Therefore, the care teams that are in operation right now, 2 of the 5 that are in operation have police officers in those vehicles. Again, the same danger that we just saw here is posed in Chicago while those police are part of these care teams, and we are working with the administration to unravel this system that was created. As Elena mentioned, the previous administration also created this entire system without any community input. There was never one community hearing on this matter, and instead they brought consultants to develop it from Texas to develop this crisis response system with police involvement. So for us, these listening sessions matter. Why we work so hard to pass an ordinance in October to make sure that we could codify what community input looks like when we're creating this treatment of trauma program here in Chicago is because we want community voices to be at the center. Just like we started this presentation, community voices help shape our entire campaign from the beginning to the present. And now we want this administration to continue those same values and include those values in their development of the treatment of trauma campaign. So the link that was mentioned, that was shared earlier in the chat, is where you can sign up if you'd like to participate in any one of these listening sessions. The questions we just shared with you, and if we could put those questions back on the screen to ask for your input on, those are the questions that we are asking community residents. This is one of many other questions that will be asked at each one of these listening sessions. But your responses today can contribute to feeding data towards the creation of this crisis response program that we are looking to expand here in Chicago. Just briefly, as you're developing this, the unique position that we're in Chicago is one that also is very important. And it has been as a direct result of the organizing that has taken in order to make sure that the public mental health centers in Chicago do not fully were not fully eliminated. The 5 that exist because of all the resistance that has happened. Any other narrative that you hear is not true, right? These centers would have been closed if it was politically feasible. But after the pushback that Rahm Emanuel saw, there was no way that Lori Lightfoot was going to do the same thing. But what she did was she starved them. She continued to not invest in them. And every investment that the clinics received in the last 4 years of the Lightfoot administration came as a direct result of our pushback, of our campaigning, of our efforts to draw attention to this investment and to the privatization of federal dollars, right? No longer was a question of, can we fund these centers? Where do we find the money? She literally was sitting on boatloads of money and chose not to invest in the public mental health centers until we campaigned to ensure that they would receive increased funding. But again, she was committed to not reopening them. Now we have commitment to reopen too. One of the things that is important to highlight in our investigation of what other crisis response systems look like in other parts of the country, one of the things that we've consistently heard from each one of those crisis response programs is that triage. Where do you take people? How do you find spaces for people, safe spaces for people that are not going to incarcerate them, criminalize them, or institutionalize them as we do when we involuntarily hospitalize somebody, right? Where do we find those spaces for triage support? Again, because of the resistance that many people did to prevent the public mental health centers from closing, we now have something to build from. And our campaign is pushing for those centers to be part of the crisis response system. So again, your answer to these questions is very important. It will help shape what those centers can look like and what our recommendations will be to the mayor when we submit our full report to the mayor in May, as instructed by the ordinance, to ensure that all the community input gets handed directly to the mayor's team and to the mayor himself in order to inform next year's budget and to inform how we will continue to invest and expand and these alternatives that center around the community and not around police. So I'll end there and I'll ask people to continue to throw your feedback in the chat. And we're happy to answer any questions with the time we have left.
Thank you. So if you want to come off mute, if you have a question, if not, we'll start maybe reading some from the chat from the beginning. Please, Janice, thank you.
Good evening. I wish we could have had another video to offset the one we just saw. And what I would like to do is just briefly explain a very similar situation, my lived experience with my son who has cognitive dysfunction. And I'm only going to speak to this to show the importance of educating caregivers to know how to interact with police officers, EMTs, etc. But I actually had to call because my son had a psychotic break. And I said to the dispatcher, of course, any dangerous weapons, does he no, none of that. I said, this is what I need you to do. Send in the EMTs because this is a medical emergency. And the dispatcher said, but we also have to send a police officer to protect the EMTs. I said, I understand that, but I don't want a police officer coming into my home who is not trained creating a worse situation for my son because we're dealing with sensory issues here. The police officer came to the door. I allowed the paramedics in. I also got the doctor on the phone. Okay, he talked to the paramedics. I talked with the police officer. He was very understanding because he felt I had some control over the situation. And the EMTs comfortably came in under the doctor's order, sedated my son, and they left. Good outcome. We've got to work with caregivers to help them understand how they can best communicate with people who that they're calling, that have to come into their homes to help out in these situations. So I hope that that's going to be a big piece of this. Is preparing people all around, because when you're dealing with something like that, you have to, I don't want to say be skilled in it, but you really do have to know how best to communicate.
Yeah, you do have, and thank you for sharing your experience. Absolutely, you do have to be skilled in it because there's a never-present danger. I want to share also, so a few things to answer to respond to your question. As a caregiver, also, we want to create alternatives to calling 911 that can better engage people earlier before things spiral. I'm sure in your case, like many caregivers, you could tell when things are going to go a certain direction, and unfortunately, because we are reluctant to call 911 to get police involved, we kind of wait until they go, till we have no choice. And so our point, as other municipalities have done, is you can call 911 in Austin, Texas, and you will get the option of fire, police, or mental health. And having the third option of mental health gives people like yourselves and others who are dealing with someone they're caring for who has a mental, to get the right support earlier without the requirement of police being there, right? Because the crisis hasn't escalated. Things are still manageable. So yes, absolutely. We want to give better options for people. We want to give caregivers like yourselves the opportunity. I want to share with this your response also jogged a point that we wanted to share. And again, if we have more time, we would unpack it. But I will direct you to our link here that I just dropped in the chat. A researcher at UIC, Dr. Andy Clarno, and his team investigated what crisis response looks like by interviewing people who've had the similar experience as you have, and collected those stories. And those stories are compiled in this investigation, in this study. And a lot of the responses mirror what you're saying, that sometimes people had to call 911 to get the care that they needed. And that meant then having to be the mediator between the people who are responding and the needs of their loved ones. So you're not alone. It's definitely a systems level issue that we know is something that has to be addressed. So thank you for sharing.
Arturo, real quick, I placed in the chat an article that speaks to the value of collaborative care.
Yes.
And I think if you heard me, I said I had the doctor on the phone.
Yeah.
Okay. We have to have those kind of understandings with the physicians that this is what we do if things start getting out of control and we need to have intervention. So, and the physician who actually wrote this article lived in Chicago for many years. So she's accessible. She's out west now, but she got her MD from the University of Chicago. But it's an excellent piece, and she wrote it with the thought in mind of how to address or how to advance health equity and behavioral health.
Beautiful. I will look at it. Thank you. Thanks for sharing.
I want to just briefly hop on and say thank you, Janice, for sharing that. And I especially just want to highlight the piece that sort of, well, we have to have a cop to protect the healthcare workers. And I want to say in this space, this is something that we've heard about. This is something that the collaborative has really pushed back on. And I will say, you know, I'm a social worker. Most of my day job work is macro, but, you know, I have done direct practice work when you are having to remain calm when someone is experiencing the worst day of your life and saying very creatively all of the different ways that you are terrible and that you should go F yourself. Those are stressful, but they are not dangerous. It is people experiencing a large amount of pain. But you know, those kinds of situations are not actually a danger to social workers. People experiencing crisis is not a danger to social workers. The only times that I have felt unsafe as a social worker, that I felt like I need to consider my environment, I don't feel safe, I'm in danger, were with interactions with law enforcement and with other social workers. Never ever with people in crisis. And that's something that we've really also tried to amplify and also really just like highlight to other providers that, you know, the danger is the person with a gun that is authorized to shoot you with it. That's where the danger is. So yes, thank you so much for sharing that.
Hi, can I share my experience? Hi, I'm Dolores Castañeda from Little Village, and I hear about police issues, but in my community, we not had a choice with the police. The police come when somebody's dead or when something happens. They come into the last minute, or when they come, it's a lot of trauma for the people. In my neighborhood, this family was killed, the wife and the daughter, and the police never respond. Nothing. People call the police, not respond. They come to the house when they really killed. And this is the experience that the community, they don't want to the police be involved in trauma issues because they never respond. They never support the community. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we showed the number, we showed the dollar amount of how much is going in our budget to policing, and to Dolores' point, right? These scenes where someone is shot and you have like the tape, right? The red tape that keeps, right, the police inside there clearing the scene and all the people outside, right? You think about how much money is inside that red tape, all the salaries of those police officers. and all the people who are outside that tape, right, the support that they need, right? How much of our city dollars are going to that? And how many of our city employees are there to tend to the needs of all the people who are witnessing, who have been impacted by those shootings, right? So that is actually a great point, Dolores. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I just wanted to, speak to what Elena had offered regarding police response during mental health crisis. I agree that police response has been definitely harmful in many situations. But speaking as a licensed social worker for the past 30 years, which includes 10 years at the Cook County Department of Corrections, another 10 years in behavioral health, also doing domestic violence work. I think, it's not as clear, it's a complicated conversation to have. It's a very real danger, that mental health crises do present. There are dangers present, and it does put people at risk of harm. And that is not to say that police should be the ones to respond. I'm not saying that, but there's many examples of social workers and other types of mental health workers in the community who have been killed. There was a person out at Thresholds many years ago that was murdered on site. And so, I mean, the response does definitely have to include so many people at the table, because it is definitely not something that's simple. But I have to say that the majority of social workers with whom I've worked would not be equipped to handle a mental health crisis where they presented with one, especially if you're dealing with folks who perhaps are responding to internal stimuli. It has to be a trauma-informed response, but the dangers are real. I mean, I've been confronted with them myself. And especially when you're considering intimate partner violence and those type of situations in which you can, arrive upon the scene, and if those dangers are so real and so deadly and can be so fatal, that it really does have to be a very comprehensive process in terms of how to handle that. And I'm not saying that it's one or the other, but I think right now what we have is so inadequate. And this is such an important conversation. I appreciate you both for bringing this to us.
Thank you so much for highlighting that. I will say that I think one of the recent cases that was really upsetting to me was the murder of Deirdre Silas. And this happened about 2 years ago. Deirdre Silas was a caseworker who worked with the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services, and she was sent to a call in a very remote rural area, and she was the only person responding to this, and was showed up, and the man in the household stabbed her to death. It was absolutely horrific, and one of the first things that many different people, including some members of the collaborative at the NASW, highlighted was that caseworkers in those situations should not be going out by themselves. One of the reasons why sometimes we hear rhetoric around the co-responder model is that way no one's coming to the door alone. And so really the answer is having a team, having enough staff to actually respond to these. And also one of the things that many different advocates pointed out is that particularly for DCFS calls, no one wants DCFS at their door. And so it's automatically creating an escalatory environment. When we have some systems in place to actually make people feel more comfortable, and where people are not going to be in a fight or flight mode of, oh no, this person from the government is at my door, I am going to lose my kids, I am going to lose my job, I'm going to get arrested. That is one of the best ways to, make sure that a crisis response is safe for everyone. So yes, that is certainly something that is important to highlight, and that is absolutely something that we are considering a lot. And one of the things that we have really been highlighting is the importance of multidisciplinary teams, because I think sometimes a neoliberal policy mindset gets people to believe, well, if we don't have this thing, then we don't get anything at all. And that's something we definitely want to push back on. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, Milani.
Hi, yes, I have a question. So as you previously mentioned, right now there's 2 like mental health clinics because of the ordinance that was passed, right? But you're still working on like reopening the other mental health clinics as well. What sort of like fundings or like what like what sort of like approaches are you looking for to like fund these other like mental health clinics?
Well, we know that some of the services they can bill for, right? And so there are billable ways that they operate and can fund themselves that way. We also, there's federal dollars and state funding that could go towards creating triage support to these centers. During the last administration, we requested that the City Department of Public Health actually apply for state funding to expand the capacity of the centers and get the funding necessary. They told us that they didn't have the capacity to apply for that funding, which we know was not true. The Department of Public Health receives about 80% of its funding from grants and funding that it gets from the federal government and other sources. So there was a reluctance to pursue state dollars, and that then justified why there was no money to expand. Also, 40% of the city budget right now goes to policing. That's tax revenue. That's our tax dollars that can be better spent on expanding capacity for crisis response, for example, right? So the money to and finally federal relief dollars, right? The federal relief dollars that the city received, nearly $2 billion, could have built up that infrastructure in the last 4 years. To me, that was, well, let's say 2 years, 3, when the money first started coming to Chicago. That to me is the biggest crime. It's that the funding, $2 billion, is there to build this infrastructure, to create the opportunities from the crisis that we went through collectively for spaces that can provide healing and support that are so desperately needed. And you're deliberately privatizing those dollars to nonprofits who will spend the money and will have no lasting infrastructure to show for it after that money is spent. Right. So the money to build up the infrastructure could have been used to then continue to figure out sustainability for those after 2026 when that money expires. But between now and 2026, we had the money to create that infrastructure. I will also say that TIF dollars are a way of creating that infrastructure. TIF dollars are tax revenue that's sequestered and as a way of giving often gifts to developers. We know that the 78, for example, the area that now is being considered for the new Sox Stadium, is a site that Rahm Emanuel in his last budget pushed for, again, nearly $2 billion of TIF dollars, tax dollars, to be set aside for development in that area. Again, TIF dollars could build infrastructure. They could build a building. They can't staff the building, but they can build a building. And politically, again, we're not using that. So the resources are there. It's just how we're choosing to invest. And one example that in my research I found out, which to me is telling of what is possible, is that when, I don't know if people know this on the call, but when the city went through the Chicago fire, right? The Chicago fire that burned down a major portion of Chicago happened in the city. When reconstruction started, the various countries donated, and there was a lot of contributions to Chicago. Well, the UK donated a lot of books for Chicago's libraries to be rebuilt after the fire. Well, it turns out Chicago didn't have libraries. They did not have public libraries. During the Chicago fire, the libraries that did exist were private. You had to be a member. You had to pay dues to enter. What we chose to do as a city in redeveloping the city after Chicago fires was we said, well, it's about time we actually build those libraries. And we did. We built those libraries. And today we have a lasting legacy of the Chicago fire. That is the Chicago Public Library System. Also, we have an expanded fire department system to prevent the next fire from happening. That's public infrastructure that was created and still is with us. We could have, and we still may have an opportunity to create that lasting infrastructure that came out of this pandemic. But again, the biggest crime was that the money wasn't used to build that infrastructure, and instead was going to fund police for their overtime for community wellness.
I just want to end and piggyback off of that answer to just highlight, we can also just tax the rich. Rich people do not pay enough in taxes to build any of these public structures of care we have been talking about. Again, a lot of times rich people consider their public good to be making some donations to private nonprofits, so that they pay less in taxes. So really, we need to tax the rich more. And if we are coming up short, we just don't do that enough. And certainly, there's a housing campaign that is actually really based off of a model of taxing the rich when rich people buy very expensive buildings to support housing. And so we can certainly do something like that to, tax the rich and fund public mental health care. Because if we get a fully publicly funded mental health system, one of the things that we get to do is we get to stop using the DSM. We didn't really talk about the Diagnostics and Statistics Manual much tonight, but it is one of the main sort of things that practitioners use, and anyone that has had to navigate the DSM codes can tell you that the DSM is not really based in science or evidence. This is being recorded, and I know it's going up on YouTube, so I'm going to say that the DSM is based off of nonsense and vibes. So we actually get, so many people were highlighting patient-centered, anti-oppressive things in the chat. We really get to do that if we actually reallocate funding that we have and we build new revenue streams by taxing the rich. So yes, lots of opportunities to actually create the world that we want. This is our information, and I will turn it back over to Katie and Yvette.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate everyone's contribution to that discussion and the speakers. So we just want to give you all a round of applause. For those that are in the community space, please feel free to stay in, and for the students, we're going to exit, but I want to remind us of next week. So we have Leone, who is talking about overlapping systems of oppression. So please join us again for next week. You'll see the speakers' information in the chat. Thank you again.